Begin Self-Publishing, episode number 26. Book Publicity with Janet Murray.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
Today's show, I've got Janet Murray, journalist and PR coach, who is an expert in the world of PR, as well as being a journalist. It's quite an unusual combination, isn't it, Janet?
It is, definitely.
Okay, today we're going to be talking about, obviously, PR and publicity. If an author wants to start publicising their book, where should they start in terms of what kind of things should they do?
Okay, well, the first bit of advice I'd give to anybody who is thinking about trying to get some publicity or some PR, and by that I mean coverage in newspapers, magazines, and on radio and TV, is to first think really carefully about what your objective is, so what you're hoping to get out of it. Now, that might sound silly, because you might well think, well, I just want to sell more books. But actually, sometimes people they've got other things that they want to do. They might be trying to use their book to get more speaking opportunities. They might be trying to use their book, maybe a self-published book, to attract a more traditional publisher. So I think the more clear you can be about why it is you want to get press coverage, and obviously if you want to sell loads of books, then that's fine too, then that will help you decide what kind of publications and programs you should be targeting, and also what kind of stories you should be targeting them with.
Yeah, so for example, if somebody was, well, I mean, this is obviously Begin Self-Publishing, so it's going to be more people who are either trying to sell books, which is always a bit of a perennial thing in the self-publishing world, or there are some people who are self-publishing as an avenue to get into traditional publishing. So if we could sort of just very briefly talk about those two cases and what kind of publications people should go for in terms of like looking for.
Well, it kind of depends on who you're trying to reach. So obviously, if your book is about carpentry, then you may well want to reach carpenters. Or if your book is about being a nail technician or something, so it really does depend. You may want to reach people who work in the nail technician industry or whatever it might be. So it really is about, if you want to sell books, it's like, well, how the people I want to buy my books, what kind of things do they read? So the first thing I often say to people is kind of leave your ego at the door, because you might have these grand ideas of being in the Sunday Times, or I don't know if you've got international listeners.
Yeah, we've got a lot of US listeners, yeah.
Yeah, so it could be the New York Times or Forbes or whatever it might be. But actually, in terms of getting you in front of the people who you want to buy your books, or whatever it is that your objective is, that might not be the right place. So if your book is, say a book about marketing, quite a niche marketing book or something, so you want to be published in the places or the publications that the people you want to sell your book to read. So, you might have these, it might be great to dream about being in Vogue or whatever, but actually if that's not going to get you in front of the people you want to buy your books, then that's really not the right way to go about it. So it's kind of thinking about who you want to reach and finding out what they read, watch and listen to. And people often say to me at this point, oh, well, I don't know. So I would just say, well, just ask them. So find 5 or 10 people who you think fit the profile of those people you want to get in front of them, and just ask, what is it you read, watch and listen to? Be aware that people often lie about what they read, watch and listen to. So you might need to sort of dig and probe a little bit. But for example, in the UK, our biggest selling title, actually, I think internationally, it's the Daily Mail. And a lot of people say that they don't read it, but everybody reads it that I know, even if it's just to read it and kind of jeer at it. It's kind of right-wing press. And interesting enough, my students, because I do an online training program and all of this, she got a piece in the Daily Mail yesterday, and she said, oh my God, all these people came up to me on the playground and said, I saw you in the Daily Mail this morning. And she thought, I never ever had them down as Daily Mail readers. But that's the thing. It's like, people will tell you that they read The Guardian or the New York Times or the Sydney Morning Herald or Forbes or whatever it might be. But actually often what they read is what comes through on their Facebook feed. So, really kind of dig a little bit and ask people to be quite honest with you. And but it's really getting a sense of those people you want to get in front of. What do they engage with online? And that's really kind of where you start. And then your next job, once you've decided, so say for example, your ebook is about carpentry, and you've discovered that the people you want to get in front of all read Carpentry Week or whatever it might be.
Yes.
Then it's getting hold of a copy and really studying it almost as if you were studying for an exam. The biggest mistake I see people making with their PR is so when I've worked as a journalist and an editor, I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been pitching myself and also being pitched to. I find that people will come and they will suggest ideas without having even read the publication or listened to the programme. And if you think about it, journalists, particularly in the UK, I think it's the same for the US, they get far more pitches and press releases than they can possibly ever give space to. So it's a competition, and it's a bit like going for a job interview. So I always say to people, you wouldn't go for a job interview without stalking your potential employer on LinkedIn, finding out who's going to be interviewing you, tracking them down on Twitter, probably looking for them on Facebook, basically trying to find out as much as you can about the company and who's going to be interviewing you, because you want to get that job. And essentially this is what PR is like. If you want to get those column inches or you want to get airtime, then you're in competition with a lot of other people. And the more that you can demonstrate that you understand that publication or program, not only are you going to come up with ideas, but you're also going to kind of impress the people that you're pitching to, because you're going there with some knowledge. But it's amazing. Basically, probably I'd say when I've been working as an editor, probably 90% of the pitches you get come from people who have never read the publication or the program, and they're kind of binned. So let's say, for example, to go back to my Carpentry Week example, or Carpentry Today, or whatever it is, you need to get that publication and you need to read it from cover to cover. And not just read it, is actually kind of take it apart and say, okay, well, I've noticed that on page 7 every week, they have an interview with an author in the sector. Perhaps I could put myself forward for that. Or I've noticed that they have 7 pages of news and one of them is a photo story. Maybe I could send a photo of something that I've been working on. And it's only by doing that you really start to kind of hone in on the specifics. It's like I've been on quite a few biggish podcasts, and when I pitch myself to these podcasts, I obviously spend some time listening to them, having a look at other guests that they've had on before and researching them and getting a sense for the kind of content that they want to run. I don't just go there and say, hey, I'm brilliant, please have me on this podcast. I'll go and try and give them what they want, give them what they need, and basically serve their audience. So that's essentially what you need to be doing. Now, it sounds like a hell of a lot when I explain it like that. A lot of people get a bit put off when I start saying it to them, and they go, actually, maybe I'll wait till I've got the money to hire a PR company. But I promise you that once you've done it a few times, once you've just got into the habit of picking up a magazine or a newspaper or watching the telly in a different way and just kind of noticing stuff, because that's really all it is. It's just noticing stuff. You'll start to be able to do it really, really quickly, and you'll start going, look at that section there. Maybe that's a Q&A section. Maybe I could put myself forward for that. And it really is just about noticing things, just noticing how the magazine's put together and the kind of structure and the regular features that they have. So that's really what I would advise people to do, is to really do your homework on this stuff, so that because most ideas get turned down. I mean, most journalists get hundreds of pitches and press releases every day, most of which don't even get opened. So you've really, to put yourself ahead of the game, you've got to be pitching that are really good.
So would you suggest that, say going back to this woodworking example that's appeared from the ether, should they start off with trying to push themselves to, say, I don't know, South Surrey Woodworking Weekly or something like that, a smaller paper or thing first, or does that really not make that much difference?
I think if you're starting out, and there's no reason why you can't go straight to national. If you've got a great idea, there's no reason why you or I or anybody listening can't just pick up the phone or send an email. I mean, it's usually done by email, and suggest an idea. However, if you're a bit nervous and you haven't done it before, I would suggest it's probably quite a good idea, particularly if you're an author, to suggest something locally, because in the nicest possible way, they're generally not as fussy about what they have. There's not as much competition, and they're looking for really nice kind of local stories. So say, for example, if you're an author, my husband, for example, has just published a book, self-published a book, in fact, on the history of our local football club. And that's obviously a really nice local story, because obviously it's about our football team. And he just kind of sent an email, I think, to our local paper saying, I've just self-published this book with co-author. They just took that straight away and did a piece on it. And I think he's done some radio as well around it. So that can help you build up your confidence, I think, before you go for maybe the bigger bigger money industry titles or your national titles. So I think that can be quite a nice thing to do. Although what a regional wants and what an industry title wants and what a national title wants are all going to be quite different. So again, that comes down to doing your homework. You know, I wouldn't pitch the same story to my local newspaper as I would pitch to a national. So it really is, again, about trying to understand the publications that you're pitching to and their audiences. And in the same way as if you're an author, you write for your audience, well, particularly if you're a non-fiction author, I imagine that you really write for your audience and you try and give them what they need, what they're going to find useful and helpful and make their day easier. So you're basically trying to do the same thing. So when you go to a journalist, you're trying to help them serve their audience by just offering them some really great content that their audience is going to love. But obviously the challenge you've got is that every audience is going to want something slightly different. So, for example, a colleague of mine who works on BBC London, which is our local London TV station, he always says to me, because I've done he works with me, we do media training together. He always says to me, you know, when I'm putting a program together or putting a piece together, I always think to myself, would my nan like this? Yeah. Would my nan understand this? And also he said he imagines his audience as, you know, people sitting at home with a tray on their knee, eating egg and chips on a tray on their lap and watching the news. And that's obviously quite a different audience to, I don't know, Newsnight, one of the sort of big evening news programs. So it really is about trying to really understand the audience of the publication or program that you're pitching to and offer something that is really great for that audience and that they're going to love.
Okay. If somebody decided that this was all too much for them and they actually did want to hire, say, a PR company or a publicist, what should they look for to ensure they get a professional and just not somebody who claims to be a PR expert?
Okay, well, there's a lot of people out there. I should preface this by saying that there are some very good PR people out there, but there are also some very bad practice out there. And one of the things that inspired me to start my business, training people in how to do PR and do their own PR, was because as a journalist, I just saw so much bad practice. So I saw people paying hundreds and hundreds of pounds to PR companies who just sent out press releases with no thought about where they were sending them and whether they would be of interest to the publications they were sending them to. And so I would look really carefully. What I would want if I was looking for publicity for a book, I'd want to see evidence. So I'd want to see the articles that they'd got published. I think you need to be realistic because I've just taken, I do an online coaching program and I've just taken a group of 10 people through it. And they all got about 3 national pieces covered or kind of in the bag during a 12-week period. So I think you have to be good, by the way. You have to be realistic. So, you know, you're not going to expect them to get you a day or every week possibly. But have a look at their track record. Get them to show you some cuttings or some links for stories that they've got in for other clients. And I would really ask them what they're going to do, because one thing I would really advise against is just writing a press release and sending it out to a load of people, because that's basically like getting a pack of cards and just throwing it up in the air and hoping one of them lands. To really be assured of press coverage, you need to send tailored email pitches to different publications. So what I'd want to hear from them is saying things like, well, you know, if we were approaching the Daily Telegraph, I think we probably would send them this kind of story. However, the Huffington Post, we might be looking at this sort of thing. So that's the kind of conversations I'd want to hear. And the reason that I say to people that I think it's really important to have a go at doing your own PR, even just for a little while, is that then when it comes to hiring people, you'll know what's good and what isn't good if you at least understand it. But what I see out there is people handing money over to PR companies or people calling themselves PR consultants who are just, they may as well just flush their money down the loo for the results that they're getting from it. And they're not even gaining an understanding of how the media works. So that's one reason why I would say roll up your sleeves and just have a go at doing it, even just for a short while, because at least you know then if you're hiring good and bad. And I've just thought of a really good tip for authors. Well, this is a good tip for everybody, actually, is if you want to get PR for your business or your brand or your book or whatever it is, the best piece of advice I could give you is to not talk about your book.
Yeah.
So, and I give this advice all the time, because if you think about it, okay, you might be able to get a review of your book, maybe in an industry title or something when it first comes out, but you can't expect journalists to keep on writing about that same book, because who would be interested in reading a review of this book over and over again? And of course, when you're going for book reviews, you're up against lots of other people who are also sending in books that they're hopeful to get reviewed. So what I always advise people to do is to look around the edges of their business brand, or in this case of their book. So I've noticed book authors are brilliant at doing this. If you look at authors, so there's an author called Adele Parks, who's a big chick lit author, quite big, and every time she brings out a book, I always notice on the Daily Mail, for example, and also in lots of the women's magazines, she takes a theme which is usually something that's related to the subject of her book. She writes fiction, and then does a kind of personal piece around it. So there was a piece one time about how she'd been proposed to like 12 times or something. It wasn't about her book, but she wrote this really compelling personal story about how she'd been proposed to like 12 times. I'm probably exaggerating. It's probably not 12 times, but it was a lot of times. And it's a really nice read, really kind of interesting piece. And at the end, it just had Adele's new book, whatever it was called, will be out, and it's published by this publisher at this time. I noticed she's done a piece about, in the Guardian's family section, she had a piece about why she's only got one child. She's done all sorts of different they're all personal stories. Oh, how her best friend divorced her. I saw that one as well. And so basically she looks around the edges of her business to the parts of her life that kind of intersect with her book writing. Because if you're a writer, I don't think you can really divorce your art from your life. And then she writes these really nice, or gets other people to write them about her, these really nice personal stories that give her a chance that kind of overlap with the themes of her book, but she's not strictly talking about her book. I noticed there's another author called Rebecca Campbell, who's like a spiritual writer, and she had a book out recently, and I noticed in Red magazine, she'd written a piece about why it's great to be single. Now, that is not about her book, but at the end there was a giant, great big plug for her book at the end of it. So for fiction writers, I would really kind of mine
personal life more than...
Yeah, and I've got a handout that I give to people. I mean, if you want, I can share it with you to share with your audience. But
okay, yeah.
It's just a PDF, which has, like, in the middle, it has your business brand. In this case, it would be your book. And then around the edges of it has the different areas of your life, like money, like family, relationships. And I've done one of my most successful pieces was a piece for The Guardian, why women need to stop working for free. And basically it was because I was fed up with people asking me to speak at events and not wanting to pay me for it. Well, generally how it went was they'd approach me and say, we want you to speak at our event. We don't want to pay you. And then I'd say, that's great, Amy. And then what's the rate? And they'd say, oh, well, we're hoping you'd do it for exposure. And I'd say, actually, no, I'd really like to. Been doing this for a long time. I quite like the money so I can, pay my. And then eventually they would usually come up with a decent enough speaking fee. So why they didn't offer it to me in the first place. Anyway, I just kind of got the hump about this one day, pitched it to the Guardian's Women in Leadership editor, and wrote this piece. And I think we put a women's angle on it because we had to, because it was the women's section of the Guardian. But and we kind of pointed out that women are more affected by this generally because they tend to be concentrated in part-time or flexible roles, that kind of thing. But essentially, I just wrote this piece about how this was happening all the time. And of course, it really resonated with people. I had people emailing me, tweeting me. I was speaking at an event in London, and this woman said to me, I'm sat right here because I read your piece on working for free. And then I signed up to your email list and I've been following you on social media. And again, I'm not talking about my business, but I'm talking about an issue that relates to it. So that's really kind of what I'd advise people to do, is to look at those areas around your book or around the themes of your book that kind of intersect with it, and look for that. That's where the gold is, really. And it might sound counterintuitive because it's kind of, I'm saying, well, don't talk about your book. If you're a non-fiction writer, then another thing that can be really fruitful is how-to articles. So but whatever the theme of your book is, so my plan is to self-publish my own book in the first quarter of 2016.
Okay.
And I've written a series of articles for The Guardian on how to write press releases, how to get press coverage, how to get on radio and TV, all the things basically I specialise in. I've written a whole series of them. And particularly the one about how to write a press release, that sends people to my website all the time. I'm always meeting people at events or people who sign up for my courses who say, oh, I read that piece that you wrote in The Guardian about how to write press releases. That led me to your website. I then introduced a lead magnet on my website, which is how to write awesome press releases, which is a little mini course, which if anybody's listening and is interested, you can go and download that. So that can be a really fruitful area. I've written stuff about how to build a great business blog, how to run events, whatever your area of specialism is. There's no reason why you can't go to Forbes, Insider, The Guardian, wherever it might be, and suggest how-to stuff. And that's going to get you a lot further than you just say to journalists, please write about my book. Please write about my book. Yeah. Because there's only so much to write about it. Does that kind of make sense?
No, it's the same as with marketing in general. I mean, the number of tweets you see where somebody says, buy my book. And it's like, well, why?
Yeah.
More widely, where do you think the most sort of exciting or underutilised opportunities are in publicity at the moment? Is it like podcasts, or do you still think like getting onto big websites and newspapers is the best way to go?
Well, I think if someone comes to me and they want to work with me and they think if they get one article in a newspaper, this happens a lot actually.
Yeah.
If I get an article in The Guardian, or if I get a piece in the New York Times or the Toronto Star, is Toronto Star?
No idea. Yeah.
Whatever it is, Toronto Morning Star, I think it is. Then all my problems are going to be solved. I'm going to sell millions of books. Now, it does happen occasionally. One article goes viral, or one TV clip goes viral. But for most of us, we're plugging away with this, and it's about that consistent. So I tend to think about it, and I think I've got another handout that I share with people on this as well, is that this kind of PR is kind of part of your whole 360 that you do. So it should complement your social media. You should have a blog, I think. I think everybody who's got something like this to sell should have a blog where they share free content. It should complement your sort of general email marketing, your podcast. I mean, I've been on the phone to somebody this morning. I've recently just launched my own podcast, and there was a lady I was doing a consult with because she's thinking about joining my coaching program, and she found me through my podcast. She just said, I started listening to it, and now I've found your blog, and now I'm looking at this and that, and now I'm really interested in joining your course. Now, I'm not sure that I would have had that kind of engagement if I was just writing articles for The Guardian. I'd be honest about it. It's about firing on all cylinders, as it were. So, I'm really active on social media, on Twitter in particular, Facebook. I'm also kind of an active email marketer, big email list, and I work really hard to kind of keep them engaged. I'd love to launch a YouTube channel with some instructional videos on the idea for the new year. And I think if you really want to be making a go at this PR and marketing stuff, this traditional PR, the newspapers, magazines, radio and TV stuff, that's just got to be part of the whole I almost see it in my head as like a 360.
It's a wider package, isn't it, really? Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got to be, there'll be some areas I think where you're stronger than others. And I don't think it's possible that you can be brilliant on every social media platform or and it takes time. But I think if you're just relying on traditional media, if you're just sort of hoping that you're going to get that one piece on the TV that's going to skyrocket your career, it's probably not going to happen. You need to be firing on all cylinders.
Okay. So you mentioned your podcast and your website. Could you spell them out for people who are interested in jumping over after this and abandoning my show forever to listen to yours?
Well, don't do that, obviously. So I've got a website, janetmurray.co.uk, and I've got a blog where I share free advice about all of this stuff, how to market yourself, how to get press coverage, even I'm a writer by trade. I've got lots of writing stuff on there as well because I've been writing professionally for 15 years. So I've got that. I've got my podcast, which you can find there as well. It's the Soulful PR podcast. I'm also quite active on social media. I say quite active. Twitter's probably where I'm the most active. So I'm at Jan_Murray. I am also on Facebook at Janet Murray UK. I'm also very recently getting very fired up on Instagram. So I'm Jan Murray UK on Instagram. I'm really enjoying that. And if anyone's listening and they want to just get started and start thinking about how they might PR their book, I've got 2 free courses actually. So I've got one which is on writing press releases. So it's a 5-day course where you get a little lesson every day, which kind of takes you through how to do it. And I've also got one on pitching to journalists as well, which is I created specifically for my podcast audience. So if you go to my website and look at the podcast page, you'll find that one there as well. And they just sort of take you through step what you need to do to kind of get up and running with this stuff. I mean, there's a lot to learn, and I would say to people, don't be too hard on yourself. I've been doing this for 15 years, so it's quite nature to me, but it does take a while to kind of assimilate it all and get going with it. And you can find when you first start pitching stuff to the media that at first you get a few knockbacks, or maybe lots of knockbacks. But if you keep at it, then you don't need any special skills or any PR training to do this. You're all capable of doing it.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Well, thanks very much for being on the show, Janet, and I'll probably start checking out your podcast as well. I haven't yet got around to doing it, so it's very nice to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.